LOWcast. Be informed about the issues that matter.
Hello and welcome to LOWcast. LOWcast is our opportunity here at Low to bring people whom we think you will want to hear from, who are interesting, engaging, and involved in the issues which matter to all of us, whether it's the environment, security, enterprise, and the future of Europe. So we are very delighted, I am delighted particularly, to be able to be in conversation today with Fons Janssen, who is the country coordinator for the European Union Climate Pact in the Netherlands. Fons, welcome. Thank you for joining us here on LOWcast. I wonder if perhaps first you could tell us what it is that the country coordinator for the Climate Pact is doing in the Netherlands.
Thank you, Andrew, for inviting me for this podcast. So yes, the country coordinator of the European Climate Pact is a very new function. I'm self-employed, and I joined this big consortium of communication and participation companies to turn the European Climate Pact into reality. And as a country coordinator, you really are with your boots on the ground. So I'm supporting my 40 ambassadors in the Netherlands. Some of them are just citizens already active in climate, and some are just making their first steps. But also NGOs or small companies or government like municipalities are also joining the pact, and I support them with their activities. And I also think a bit more strategic about how can we find these synergies, what is already going on the grassroots and national level, and how can the EU with all its programs and initiatives for climate and sustainability, how can they really create an added value, what is already existing here in civil society and business.
So Fons, how are people reacting to this? Are they making pledges across the Netherlands about how they can respond to the climate crisis?
Yes, I must say, especially like the first groups that are making pledges or becoming ambassador already know about the EU, and that the EU is doing a lot for climate and sustainability, or indeed creating the cooperation between countries. Especially the youth, also new stakeholders come up to create a pledge about how to travel differently or eat differently, or how you really renovate your house to cut down on energy costs. Because nowadays with the energy crisis and the war in Ukraine, also like the green transition when it comes to energy also is more also about economy, because you can really save much more money now with going out of fossil fuels, while also preventing that money goes into Russia. So you see this like also societal increase of awareness and engagement to make sure that people really are living more sustainably. The pact is only 1.5 years old, so finally after this post-COVID time we are managing to see each other physically, and now I already see that our network is expanding and more people are applying for ambassadorship, also creating a pledge.
Oh, that's interesting. How often do you find that people are reacting negatively? I mean, is there a sense in which people are saying, well, it's not my job to do this, you know, what I do may make a small difference. What really matters is what happens in China or in India. But actually, what matters is that everybody does whatever they can, because it's only by that accumulation of large numbers of changes that we can possibly hope to make the changes that are necessary. Do you find that people are taking the responsibility on themselves?
Yes, I see like the early majority is ready for it. I think the biggest challenge that I see with the pact is not that much dissatisfaction. Of course, sustainability can sometimes be perceived as a threat. So, for instance, I live in a rural countryside in the southeast of the Netherlands, in the province of Limburg. And for us, like some farmers really view sustainability as a threat, although they really witness the results of climate change with the droughts that we have experienced, and also the heavy rainfall that was a catastrophe last year summer in my province. However, they also see that with sustainability, especially with livestock farming, that has to change, and that really changes also the business model, and they do not see the answer or the vision to get out of it, and that creates dissatisfaction, of course. But I think the major challenge is actually indifference, to make sure that people actually know that climate change is affecting their lives in the coming 30-40 years, whether they want it or not. And I think what the pact also does is that people that are interested to make their first step are being helped, because climate change is sometimes so large and people talk about it, where it also starts often with what can you do locally as a person, and that can be in your private life, but also in your working life. We're talking with people about it. For instance, last week I met the big healthcare community in the Netherlands that is super active for sustainability, actually, but they often are not being heard because health is the priority and green comes second. But green and health are often interlinked.
Very interlinked, absolutely. They're going to, and increasingly so, I suspect, as time goes on, isn't it? Increasingly, we're going to be recognizing that the climate crisis impacts are going to be very damaging potentially to people's health. And so
yes, that's true. To give some examples, in the Netherlands, we are quite a wet country. So we've got quite some insects like mosquitoes that are bring along more tropical diseases in here. So we used to have marshes, and we still are a water-rich country, but that also brings challenges along. Another thing is, with the droughts, we will experience more heat waves, and we are a growing population, and we need to protect the old people and make sure that our cities are more greener, because by the heat island effect, that the cities are even more hotter than the green parks, especially old people forget to drink and actually die. And that's really like a big effect on public health. And that's something we really need to prevent, both by climate mitigation, but also adaptation in the cities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You mentioned about the response of young people, but do you think there is a generational divide here, that young people are far more energized by the necessity of dealing with the climate crisis now?
Yes. So the interesting about my function is that I also follow the social developments, how civil society is being organized in the Netherlands. So I really see a lot of new young groups coming up. So we already had the students that were very active with the young climate movement, but due to our Dutch climate agreement, which was being formed in 2018 and 2019, also the young workers organized themselves within the sector, but also among sectors, cross-sectoral, to get a stake at the table, the negotiation table of the Dutch climate agreement. And that also has to do with the fact that labor unions in the Netherlands are relatively have fewer young members, and are putting sometimes the conservative social side in front instead of this big green transition as the priority, because you can save jobs in the old economy, but that doesn't work for us, because the current generation that is starting to work, they know very well that the targets that we are setting ourselves towards 2030, 2040, and 2050 are within our working career. So we need to change our businesses and public organizations in order to meet the goals of our generation. However, the most focal piece of youth are actually Generation Z and Generation Alpha. So really the people between 15 and 20 years old. And that's because they are growing up in a time which is only in their minds set by crises. With the corona pandemic, the fires of Australia that were a lot on the social media channels that Generation Z views via TikTok, and also the extreme weather events in the Netherlands. They see that their direct environment isn't safe. And I'm 26, and I had a relatively calm youth here in the rural sites. And for me, it's like I can put my focus and efforts to combat climate change, but for them, they really experience even more as a crisis, and therefore are more on the streets. So for instance, last weekend, they were in the streets again with the Fridays for Future movement across the Netherlands.
Right. Yeah, well, now is the time for that kind of activism, really, because we've really got to not only show that individual countries, including the developed countries in Europe, can meet their contributions, the nationally determined contributions to carbon reduction and reducing greenhouse gases, but we've got to persuade others around the world that we can work with them to make it happen.
Exactly.
But Europe has a responsibility here. I mean,
it plays a responsibility, Andrew.
And the richest part of the world has got to play a very big part, hasn't it?
Yes, and I think what is very nice about the EU is that we already have quite some international programs. For instance, you've got Erasmus Mundus with an exchange for higher education. We already have the EU and the African Union European Youth Cooperation Hub. we've got the eastern and southern neighborhoods, so eastern neighbors in Europe and the north part of Africa, strategic corporations to make sure that our generation can also like lead the change. Because when you're young, you don't know about all the different governmental programs, how they can help you. The Climate Pact is this social network that makes those things more visible to the target groups to empower youth, but also organizations and businesses to take an additional step for sustainable action. And what I really like is that with this African Union, European Union Youth Hub, you really build trust among the generation because we've got common challenges. We don't know each other's backgrounds, but this program, for instance, facilitates that. And the Netherlands, of course, also has a lot of international relations, but not that much, for instance, compared to France or Portugal or Spain or England in the African Union. And therefore, by working together under this umbrella of the EU African Union group, you are given many more opportunities as a European young citizen to tackle the challenges that you see ahead. For instance, chocolate production or coffee bean production that we import a lot from Africa. Yeah, if you want to work on sustainable development, these are the kind of governmental institutional infrastructures that Europe already grants young citizens.
Yeah, no, that's a very encouraging, those are really encouraging examples. Thank you for those. That's really interesting. Of course, as we're talking, Fons, we're in a position where we're continuing to see day by day these terrible events in Ukraine and the appalling aggression launched against Ukraine. But of course, it's turning into an energy crisis as well, as you mentioned earlier. And do you think, is it beginning now to come home to people that if we become increasingly able to use renewable energy and reduce our dependence upon fossil fuels, that is both a security gain as well as an environmental gain?
Yes, indeed. So that really demonstrates, like the war in Ukraine really demonstrates our interdependency with Russia regarding natural gas, but also with the food dependency, because Ukraine also produces a lot of grains. So we have to really rethink about how can we be more efficient in our usage. And what I've seen now so far with the EU and the Netherlands is that they are thinking a lot with technology and economics. So strategic gas reserves to make sure that we have got enough energy in reserve when we are needing it in the next winter, because luckily last winters, maybe also because of climate change, are a lot weaker, more warm than before. However, I see that we can do much more with also raising awareness that we should consume less energy. So our Prime Minister so far has not set up like also social programs to make more people aware. Of course, technology is being further improved, also with the renovation of houses that is getting more clearly. However, we see that civil society in the Netherlands has already created a big manifesto last Sunday with the Day Against Gas or Natural Gas, to really make sure that this is also just like with the oil crisis a few decades ago, that we also create like more social movements to make people aware how they can save energy and therefore also money, but also prevent indeed that money from the Netherlands will flow towards Russia, with which they buy like this armed conflict there. Yeah,
no, absolutely. Just one controversial question, maybe in some parts of Europe. It has opened the debate about nuclear energy as a relatively carbon-free source of major energy and stable energy, which of course is one of the difficulties people have often found with a very heavy reliance upon renewables. What is the view in the Netherlands, and what is your own personal view about the use of nuclear energy as a sort of base load for our energy requirements?
So in the Netherlands, there was already since a couple of years ago, like a shift in the discussions that we should have some additional nuclear power plants. So far, we have only one in the very southwest in the province of Zeeland, but our national government I think a couple of decades ago already reserved 2 additional spots for nuclear power plants, one in Rotterdam with the big industry and the port, and one in Groningen in the very north. In Groningen, the province already told them that they don't want an additional spot, but in Rotterdam, there was a possibility. So right now, the government, before the energy crisis, was already discussing with with the political parties and also with the location, whether an additional nuclear power plant can be built. However, we need to take in mind that these things, if already commitment is given now, it takes about maybe 10 or 15 years to execute it. So if you look at the challenges that we face with climate action now, like you should do that probably in parallel, but you should make sure that also the renovation of houses, the energy grid, renewable energy installment, batteries for the grid operation, are not being slowed down because we keep discussing about whether we should build or build not nuclear power plants. That having said, it's interesting enough that most energy policy is quite a national thing, but it's sometimes strange that Germany is closing off nuclear power plants much faster, while it takes us 8 or 10 years to build some maybe potential ones in the Netherlands. And I think what this energy crisis shows us, that if you want to get rid of fossil sources, renewable energy is still too little, and you want to shut off nuclear power plants, eventually the numbers have to fit that you can still provide energy security. And that's right now not the case if you look at the coming 5 and 10 years ahead. If you want to close off everything and only keep it with renewables, that does not add up the numbers. So it requires more political dialogue, not only with politicians, but also with our civil society in, for instance, the border regions, how we are ensuring our energy security and also affordability.
That's really interesting. Thank you. The European Commission, of course, are giving leadership to the Climate Pact and the pledging process. And in Vice President Timmermans, of course, we've got a real champion there. But so do you feel that when you and the country coordinators are getting together, is there more that you hope to see from the European Commission's plans in future, or do you feel that they put it right front and centre?
Yeah, I think so. That if you know the picture of the European Green Deal, the Climate Pact is one of the pillars, like one of the social pillars. I think we are not stressing enough that the social pillars are important with the slogan "Leave no one behind." And Europe is doing fantastic work when it comes to economic transitions, new geopolitical instruments like the carbon border adjustment tax, so that we are greening our industry here and not importing cheaper but also more polluting materials or products from outside the EU. However, when you just look at the numbers with finance, social innovation, like maybe it's a higher gamble, you don't know what you're getting back, but it's just a fraction concern if you compare it to the billions of euros being invested right now in economic measures. So I think what the EU is doing right is that they acknowledge the importance of social innovation with the pact, to get really everybody on board and getting connected in new ways, not only with the traditional pyramids, how organizations or individuals organize, but also across themes, across like the geographical levels of EU, national, interregional. But I think we can invest like even more in the management, because we have a lot of European programs. Many of them do not reach the target groups that have a right on it to know about. And the pact can help with it, but right now, like we only have a very few, like every country has one or maybe half of FTE, so a full-time employee to work on the pact. And I think if we really want to scale up, it's really about social organization, like social organizing our society to really, make sure that climate action is taking up at the pace that is needed, while we have committed ourselves with the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Yeah. I'm afraid time is against us, Fons. It's been absolutely fascinating, but I would like really one final point I'd be really interested in. Obviously, I think you mentioned about the business community and the labour unions and so on. And when you're encouraging small and medium-sized enterprises and their workforces to adopt climate pledges, what sort of pledges do you hope that they will be able to bring forward for themselves?
Yes, I really invite especially the SMEs, the small medium enterprises, to get on board and also create a pledge. It can be really like a soft side of the pledge, or like a North Star pledge, so that you really are fit with the Paris Agreement with 1.5 to get towards net zero. But it can also with small steps about making sure that your employees are also driving clean, are eating good, healthy and sustainable food. That's like small steps and big steps can be made with the pledge within the Climate Pact. But I think like in general, SMEs, it's like you've got traditional SMEs, but also very innovative ones. But I like invite them both to make a pledge, because the traditional SMEs with existing business models, they are in the grassroots, in the civil society, in the villages and neighborhoods. And the innovative SMEs, they challenge the status quo. And most of the SMEs do not have time to get in touch with the EU. But via the pact, we make them like even the social network even closer to them, but also connect them to various other elements that they find interesting. So other SMEs in the region or other businesses in the same theme that already made a pledge, but in a neighboring country. And you can really learn from each other and like improve your lobbies in the long term, and also getting the subsidy programs to know them better. Luckily in the Netherlands, we've got RVO Nederland, which already stimulates like the overview of the subsidy programs. But if you want to participate in one program, you need to work international with other countries. And the pact is also like a social network to ensure that. So a pledge is good in the interest of everybody, but also good in the interest of a business holder.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Fons. And it's been fascinating to hear about not only your work in the Netherlands as the country coordinator for the Climate Pact, but also your views about some of these key environment issues. Thank you very much indeed. It's been great to hear from you. So Fons Janssen, the country coordinator for the Climate Pact in the Netherlands, has been our guest today on LOWcast, and we've been delighted to hear from him. And we thank you very much indeed, Fons, for your time today.
It was a pleasure, Andrew.
Thank you.